Well, we've seen quite a shocking and sad failure in democracy this week. The British have voted to leave the EU. And I guess the thing that was a bit interesting for me is that there are quite a few people out there who are saying, hey, if I'd known it would have gone this way, I would have voted to remain. In other words, they're having regrets. And this is, I guess, my fundamental problem. Direct democracy often gets it wrong. I mean, putting a complex issue, and it was a situation a few years ago in California, when there were two propositions that came up, one of which wanted to cap taxes, the other one wanted to increase spending. And I think they both got up, if I remember correctly. And you think, well, hang on, these issues are complex. You can't do both things at the same time. There are trade-offs that need to be made, and often these are complex, and there are unintended consequences. The reason we have representative democracy is that we can pay people whose careers involve understanding these issues. Yes, those people are self-interested, but that's why we have a competitive system. One lot keeps the other lot honest, and the press is out there keeping them both honest. So these people have delegated, and I'm talking about parliamentarians, they have a delegated responsibility to understand these complex issues, to explain them to us, but to make the decisions for us. That's what we pay them for. And if we're unhappy, we change most of those guys. And the majority of UK parliamentarians were for Remain. So why did we have this referendum that led to this result that people weren't expecting, and which is going to have bad consequences for the UK, obviously, but for the EU as well, because it was a lot of the laws that were coming out of the EU were the result of a British desire for trade. Let's make trade easier. Let's allow people to trade in services and in goods, and for that we need uniform standards across the Union. It's Britain that has basically fought against, I don't want to stereotype here, but the French desire for de regime, that the state always knows best. Well, anyway, what we've had is a vote, and not a huge consensus vote, 52 to 48, for a fundamental change. Now, fundamental changes to the way a society works need to be hard. Why do they need to be hard? Because we need to be sure that we're getting them right, that there is an overwhelming consensus for the change. Right? So this morning I spent quite a bit of time reading in the papers and online about idiots, basically. People who thought it would never happen, so they voted leave because they thought it would remain. Well, why would you vote for leave if you thought Remain was going to happen and you wanted it to happen? Well, what sort of idiot are you? I mean, if you want to send a signal to the politicians, why don't actually contact your local member? No, I'm going to vote a way that I don't really believe in. There were other people, stories about Google reporting that the biggest search in the UK after the Brexit referendum came through was, what is the EU? You tell me you didn't become informed until afterwards, and now you realise how you've stuffed it up? This is why you have representative democracy. The politicians are meant to be informed. You voted on something you didn't understand? I mean, what sort of an idiot are you? Ugh. Okay, and then others believed, forgive the spelling error here, others believed the lies that were being peddled. For example, Nigel Farage said, hey, we're paying £350 million to the EU. Well, that's not true, if you look at the net flows. And then that £350 million would be available for NHS spending. Yeah, well, that was very easy for him to say. Now in the news, he's actually stepping back on that. He said, well, I wasn't exactly right. Yeah, slogans, populist slogans are easy to spout. People rely on you as a politician to make decisions. So they all followed him instead of following the consensus. And I heard before the referendum that people poo-pooed experts. That there are these experts who are saying, here are the problems we're going to have if we leave. Say, oh, they're experts. We know what you... Well, so hang on. You're telling me somebody who understands the issue, you don't want to take their advice? Frankly, you deserve all you get. So why was the Brexit referendum, why did it suck? It sucked because for fundamental issues, fundamental changes to the nature of society, those fundamental changes have to be hard. By making them hard, you know that those changes don't happen unless everyone's aboard, unless you have an overwhelming majority. So, look, I often compare Australian politics to American politics and how American politics, the way they're set up, mitigate against compromise and working together. Well, let's now again compare Australian politics to UK politics. The Australian Constitution can be changed by referendum. Again, my apologies for the spelling errors. I made these slides quite quickly. For the Australian Constitution to be changed, you basically need 4 things to happen. And if not all 4 of those things happen, the Constitution doesn't change. In other words, first up, the people who we pay to understand these issues, politicians, have to agree. So there's got to be an absolute majority for the change in the House of Representatives and an absolute majority in the Senate. Then you go to a referendum, i.e. you let the people vote. And then if a majority of the voters votes for the change, so like 52-48 in the British referendum, and there's a majority in the states. Remember, in Australia, we're a federation of states, and we're all in it together, the little ones, the big ones. This is a federation of sovereign entities. So to change the way this federation functions, the majority of those entities need to agree with that. So in Australia, that means you need a majority in the majority of the states. So 4 out of the 6 states must vote for the change, right? So there's a bunch of hurdles to jump here. Absolute majority in the reps, absolute majority in the Senate, absolute majority of voters, absolute majority of states. And if all those 4 hurdles are jumped, then you know that you have a consensus for change. Okay, so what does that mean about Australian change? You've got to really be sure about it. Now, the British 52-48 vote is a joke, right? You know that people who voted for the change, simply, some of them are saying, look, I don't realise what I've done. If I voted again now, I would vote to stay. Now, let's apply the Australian criteria to the British vote. We know that both houses of parliament in the UK have majorities of people who don't want to leave. So we already failed the first 2 criteria. We had the majority of votes. That's fine. Now, let's apply a majority of states or political entities. And if we're going to think about political entities, look, we know London is different from the rest of England. So let's talk about London. Let's talk about the rest of England. Let's talk about Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. Oh, I left Wales off this one. England and Wales, the rest of England and Wales voted to leave. Northern Ireland, London, and Scotland voted to stay. So we've got a majority against leaving. So the required majority of states would not have been met. And the parliamentary majority would not have been met. So what does this mean? The Brits have screwed up. They don't know how to run referendums. They've had no experience with it. And now they're going to suffer. And unfortunately, Europe's going to suffer as well because the Brits were a sensible voice at the table. And you know the irony of this? The Brits are now going to be in a Norwegian situation where if they want to trade with the EU, they have to apply EU laws, but they don't get a seat at the table in deciding what those laws are. How thick can you be?